Welcome to Crosstalk Solutions. My name's Chris, and today we're going to be taking a look at all of this equipment that I've got here on my desk. This is some of the latest offerings from TP-Link, and it is their Omada line of products. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, basically, these are like prosumer grade products. So on the lower end, the consumer grade products are going to be like your Netgear Nighthawk and the sort of all-in-one combo devices that have your router, firewall, access point, switch, basically combined into one unit. Then the next step up is going to be something like the prosumer UniFi stuff that we see from Ubiquiti Inc. or something like this TP-Link Omada, where instead of having everything combined into, one little appliance, you have a little bit more flexibility over the equipment that you purchase for a more prosumer or bigger network by purchasing components individually. So the access points are separate, the switches are separate, the router firewall is a separate unit, and all of it's controlled by a piece of software. It's like SDN or software-defined networking. And we're gonna get into all of that in this video. We're gonna go over this equipment that TP-Link sent me. We're gonna talk about the topology of a software-defined network. We're gonna talk about the Omada interface and all of the features that it has. We're also gonna talk about sort of the big question, which is this a viable replacement for Ubiquiti's UniFi equipment? In terms of pricing as well as feature set. All right, we're gonna talk about all of that in this video. We're gonna cram in as much of that as we possibly can, but of course, your comments are always welcome, and put those comments down below. Also, if you haven't already, this is the perfect time to hit that like button as well as subscribe to Crosstalk Solutions for more content just like this. If you wanna just buy me a beer too, there's a link for that down below. So now let's hop into the equipment that TP-Link sent me. I do want to be clear about that up front. All of this equipment that you see here, with the exception of these network cables, was provided by TP-Link free of cost to me in order to review and evaluate these products. But of course, my opinion cannot be bought with free equipment. All of my opinions and evaluations of these products are as if I had purchased them myself. So let's start from the top down here. Right on top here, we have this little guy here. This is the TP-Link Omada Cloud Controller. This is like their hardware controller for the Omada software. Basically, this runs the software that controls all of this various equipment. And you can buy this OC200 controller, which supports up to 100 Omada devices, or you can buy the OC300 controller, which supports up to 500 Omada devices. Alternatively, you don't need the hardware controller. You can install a software controller on an existing PC or server, or you can use TP-Link's cloud, the Omada cloud. All of it will do the same thing. All of the pricing that I'm gonna talk about is basically how these things are priced on Amazon today, and there's gonna be links to all of this equipment down below. Those are affiliate links. If you click on them, it doesn't change your price, but it does get us a couple bucks for the referral, and we certainly appreciate any referrals that we get. The OC200 hardware controller on Amazon as of today is $83.92. And what we get here is basically 2 Ethernet ports and a USB port and a reset switch. So the Ethernet ports are for connecting this controller to a switch. As you can see, there's no power, so it is PoE powered off of the switch down here on the bottom. And then the USB dongle that I have in here is for backups. So if you wanna set the device to auto backup, it can back up to this, whatever USB stick you have sticking in here. And we'll cover all of that sort of stuff when we look at the actual Omada interface. The higher end version of this same device, the OC300, is actually $159.99. That's the one that can control up to 500 Omada devices, whereas this one is rated to control up to 100 Omada devices. The next thing here is our router firewall. Now this is a weird device. It seems to have 2 model numbers. I've seen it referred to as the ER605. I've also seen it referred to as the TL-R605. But regardless, this is your router, firewall, and VPN device, sort of the head of the network. And this device is $59.95 on Amazon, and what you get are 1 gigabit WAN port, 1 gigabit LAN port, and then these 3 ports in the middle, you can configure those as either WAN or LAN. They do make an alternative version of this. So again, this one is $59.99 on Amazon. They make one, sort of the next model up is $149.99 on Amazon, and it includes a Gigabit WAN SFP Plus port, and it's also just like way more powerful, like more powerful CPU, more RAM, more internal storage, etc. This is sort of the bottom of the line one. The next one up is actually pretty powerful. The specs are pretty impressive. Now below that, we have the first of two switches that we're going to be taking a look at. This switch for this setup, I actually really didn't need. This is a 5-port 2.5 gigabit unmanaged switch. And when I say unmanaged, it means it does not show up in the Omada interface whatsoever. It's a completely dumb switch. It's literally just there to provide 2.5 gigabit connectivity to whatever devices happen to need it. Now, none of the devices here have 2.5 gigabit capability. So really, I have the switch plugged in, but I'm literally not using it at all. Now below that, we have the actual managed switch. So this is model number TL-SG2210MP, and this switch is an 8-port gigabit switch with 2 SFP ports as well. So it's basically 10 ports total, 8 gigabit Ethernet, and 2 gigabit SFP. Now these are SFP, not SFP plus, but TP-Link has like a ton of switches. I think you've got like 10 or 12 different switches that you can pick from, all the way from sort of lower end, 5 and 8 port gigabit switches, all the way up to higher end switches that have 10 gig SFP plus ports and 48 ports worth of connectivity, that sort of stuff. So they have basically a switch for anything that you could possibly need. This switch here, as I said, has 8 ports. They are all PoE capable, so it's 8 802.3 AF/AT PoE plus ports, and you can have a total PoE budget of 150 watts from this switch. All right, plugged into this switch, we have 2 access points. We have this big ol' access point right here. As you can see, it is actually quite large. It's about the size of my head around. This is the EAP620. This is a 2x2 multi-user MIMO Wi-Fi 6 access point. PoE powered, as you can see, but they also include a power brick. So if you don't have a PoE switch, this does come with a power adapter that you can plug in. So Wi-Fi 6, as I mentioned, the port on this is just a gigabit port, so it is not a 2.5 or multi-gigabit port on the back of this device. As far as the antenna configuration of this device, it's got a 4 dBi antenna in the 2.4 gigahertz and a 5 dBi antenna in the 5 gigahertz with a antenna gain of 25 dBm in both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. And I ran this thing through its paces. We will see how this access point stacks up in our Crosstalk access point benchmarking a little bit later in this video. Additionally, we have this in-wall access point. This is actually a pretty great value. So if you wanted to extend networking to a room that maybe couldn't pick up a signal from one of these larger access points, this is $49.99. So it's $49.99. It's not Wi-Fi 6. This is Wi-Fi 5, but it's a nice little unit. It's PoE powered in the back, and then you've got 2 standard ports down at the bottom, 2 standard gigabit Ethernet ports, and then a third that is gigabit Ethernet as well as PoE out. So for instance, if you wanted to plug in a voice over IP phone, this would be perfect for that. Like if you had this in an office where you're PoE powering the TP-Link in-wall access point, and then you're separately powering a VoIP phone off of this access point as well. Again, $49.99. This is the EAP225-wall. And it's 2x2 multi-user MIMO, but again, it's Wi-Fi 5, not Wi-Fi 6. Let's take a quick look at the TP-Link Omada topology. If you are familiar with similar types of devices, such as the UniFi line of products, this is going to be nothing new for you. However, if you're used to more of the consumer sort of all-in-one devices, you might not understand how all of these different bits fit together. So let's go ahead and go over that very quickly. If you're in that consumer world, typically, here's your internet out here. You're going to have a modem from your ISP, and then right here, you're going to have your, your Linksys router or your Netgear router with the antennas on it, and everything sort of all in one device. And this is it. Like, that's your whole network. You just connect your wireless clients wirelessly and your wired clients to the back of this device. When we're talking about the sort of next level up, the prosumer grade hardware such as TP-Link Omada, we're taking all of the functions that are crammed into that one little box and we're separating them out so that we have more control and more flexibility over the design of our network. So in this case, my firewall router is the ER605, that's the 5999 device, and basically that is just the edge of my network. On this side of the firewall is the WAN, or wide area network, the internet, and on the inside of this device is the LAN, or local area network. Typically, you might run some devices plugged directly into the firewall, but in most cases, if I were designing something, I wouldn't have client devices in the firewall. I would only hang other switches off of the firewall. So that's what we have down here. So the two switches that I have are this TL-SG2210MP at 157.49, and then the 5-port 2.5 gigabit switch is the TL-SG105M2 at 139 bucks. So basically both of those we would string directly off of the router firewall, and the switch configuration that you have is going to vary greatly based on the devices that you have, right? If you have a lot of wired devices, you're going to want a switch that has more ports in it. But if most of your clients are going to be connecting wirelessly to an access point, then maybe something like this 8-port gigabit switch with PoE might be plenty powerful for you. They even make one that's 8 ports where only 4 of the ports are PoE. So for instance, if you only had 2 access points and that was all of the PoE devices in your house, you might want to opt for that one. It's going to be a little bit more cost effective. So plugged into the switches, we're going to have a number of things. First, we're going to have our wired devices. So any computer or television or, Nintendo Switch or whatever that has a hardwired connection, it's always best to hardwire where you can. Where you can't hardwire, that's where we're going to plug in our access points. And in this case, I have 2 access points. I have the EAP620. That is the 2x2 multi-user MIMO Wi-Fi 6 access point. And then I have the in-wall EAP225. Actually, the model is EAP225-wall at $49.99. That's the Wi-Fi 5, or 802.11ac is the technical name for that technology, access point that can go in-wall, and it also has a few wired ports on the bottom. Connected to those access points are going to be all of our wireless clients, our Roku and our Sonos systems and our laptops and iPads and iPhones and Android devices. Whatever you happen to have that connects wirelessly is going to connect to that access point. The access point is plugged hardwired into one of your switches. Then the other thing that we have out here connected with Power over Ethernet is the OC200 TP-Link Omada hardware controller. This is the brains of the operation. This is where we run the Omada software that controls all of the settings and gives us visibility into the network, such as our wired devices, our wireless devices, the bandwidth that we're using. All of the configuration settings for all of these devices, that's all found in the hardware controller. And the hardware controller, as I said earlier, you don't have to have this box, the OC200 box or the OC300 box if you have a ton of devices. The controller can be cloud-based in TP-Link's cloud. You can self-install it on like a Windows machine or maybe a Linux server. I'm not exactly sure how you can self-install it. I hadn't looked into that part of it. Or you can buy the hardware controller, which is what I have. Next, we're going to take a look at the TP-Link software itself. So this is the dashboard of TP-Link Omada. Now I have logged into this locally with local administrative credentials. However, if you like, you can also enable cloud credentials that allow you to log into TP-Link Omada with, through the cloud with your Omada cloud login. There is also a TP-Link Omada app that you can put on your phone, and from what I found, the app is very fully featured compared to what you can do in the desktop interface. So I'm not going to cover the app in much detail specifically, but just know that there is an app that allows you to make basically most of the settings that you can see in the actual desktop interface. So right here at the top of the dashboard, we get some summary information. You can run speed tests and figure out how much capacity you're currently using of your internet connection. We also have some switches, 2 EAPs online, 8 clients online, and if we disconnected any of these devices, it would show that one of the devices is disconnected. Down below, we also have some pre-configured dashboards. Now, I've adjusted this one a little bit, but you can see we have an overall dashboard, a network dashboard, a client's dashboard, and then we can add additional dashboards if we want. The desktop or the dashboard of TP-Link Omada is actually surprisingly configurable, and I thought that was really refreshing. So again, we can add our own dashboard if we want. Sure would, right? And then if we click on this dashboard, we can click settings and then go through all of these different widgets down here and add various widgets to the dashboard, and then of course rearrange them and however we want to see everything. So we have widgets for network stuff, alerts, most active clients, most active switches, client distribution among access points, all sorts of good stuff here that you can see. Many different statistics for network stuff and client stuff. So we're starting off pretty good. I like the dashboard of TP-Link Omada, and for anyone asking, I have not yet found a dark mode. So for all of you dark mode folks out there, so far it doesn't seem like that's a possibility, but I do like the dashboard in general. Going down the side here, we have statistics. Now, statistics are going to show you for your access points, your router, your switches. You got performance statistics, switch statistics, speed test statistics, and then, of course, within each of these different categories, you can drop down to your different devices and see specific information such as user count, usage percentages, traffic, etc., for all of your various Omada devices. If you click on Map, we get a topology map of all of our stuff here. So we can see here's my router. Here's the switch that I've got. We've got my 2 access points plugged into the switch as well as the Omada controller. And then we have clients in the switch as well. And you can, of course, drill down into those clients if you like. We can see that I've got 2 devices that are wirelessly connected to the EAP 620 access point. And I've got 4 devices that are wired into this client group here. You can also do a regular map. So if you want to upload a map of your office or your location, and then you can put devices onto the map and see where everything's located. Now, one thing that this map doesn't have that would be really nice is if you could scale the map and then show the approximate coverage radius of the access points. That's always very useful information to see. And in this case, it looks like you can put your devices on the map, but there's really no way to actually show like what the wireless coverage of any of your access points is going to be. If we click on devices, of course, we're going to see all sorts of information about our devices. And if you click on any individual device, the information tray pops out from the right-hand side where you can check out the various networks that you're connected to. Then we have config, which gives you the name of the device, various services such as SNMP, LLDP, hardware offload, and then you can manage the device, which means, give it a custom firmware file, move it between different Omada sites, or forget it off of this site entirely. And again, for those people who are familiar with the way that this stuff is done in UniFi, this is going to be really familiar because it's almost exactly a UniFi clone that they've built into TP-Link Omada. Speaking of different sites, you do have a site manager up here. So you can add additional sites to your Omada controller. Sites would be like if you had different business locations, you would want each one to be its own site. Or if you were managing multiple clients, you would want each of your various clients to have their own site in the Omada controller. They also have this hotspot manager, which if you click on it, it gives you some information about, if you're using the hotspot or voucher functionality. It'll give you information about authorized clients, vouchers, local users, operators, etc. It seems to be like a pretty full-featured hotspot / voucher mechanism built into the Omada software. If we click on any of our access points, we can also see some information about the LAN, as well as the uplink. We can see information about the radios, clients that are connected, and then we have the configuration of the access point, such as the IP address. This is actually kind of nice. You can set the IP address to DHCP, but then set up a fallback IP so that if for any reason the access point is unable to get a DHCP IP address, it can then get this fallback IP address. So basically you can kind of set a static IP address on the device that it'll fall back to if the DHCP server isn't working for some reason. Radios. Now, as far as radios go, the only change that I made when I do testing of these, benchmark testing of these access points, I always set the channel width to the maximum. In this case, the maximum channel width on the Wi-Fi 6 access point is 80 megahertz. Everything else I just leave to auto or high. Then we have WLAN, so you can create various WLAN groups, which is, just basically a set of SSIDs that are sort of grouped together in case you want different SSIDs showing up in the cafeteria versus the library type of thing. Then under services, we can enable a management VLAN. We have some information about SNMP for this particular device. And advanced shows us some advanced function. Manage device gives you all the same stuff for moving it between sites, forgetting the device, manually upgrading firmware, etc., etc. And again, apologies if I'm brushing through this really quick, but there's just so much to cover in an interface like this. I want to make sure I kind of touch on everything, even if it's just a little bit. Okay, so there's our devices. You can also click on clients, and clients is going to show you all of your clients. Clicking on Insights gives us some reporting such as known clients, past connections, past portal authorizations if we're using their hotspot functionality, as well as any information on rogue access points that are found in the network. Finally, we have our log, which is going to show us our alerts and events and notifications. Okay, down here for admin, this is where you can add admin users. And notice that I've got two admin users. I've got the main administrator, which is a local account, and then I've got my cloud main administrator, which is my Omada connected cloud account. So I can use either one of these logins to log into the local controller, or if I want to log into the cloud controller, for instance, if I'm not on site, I can log into the cloud controller using my cloud main administrator. All right, next let's take a brush through the settings. Here is our site configuration. We can call this whatever we want, such as Crosstalk Office, something like that. Now it has these application scenarios: hotel, restaurant, shopping mall, airport, office, factory. This is something that it has you pick when you first log into the device. And I'm not actually sure what this does. There's probably some sort of templating, scenario templating that you can do. Let's see, if we create a new scenario, Crosstalk, create. But see, like, what can you do with that? Now that I've created this scenario, like, what do you actually do with it? I'm not really sure. And I didn't take any time to investigate that function. Below that, we have just some general settings, such as enabling alert emails, turning on or off the device LEDs, enabling automatic upgrades, and you can see everything else that's here. All right, let's click on wired networks. So wired networks is first going to allow us to control the ports on our firewall. So if you recall, the firewall had one WAN port, one LAN port, and then the 3 ports in between were configurable. They were either LAN or WAN. Well, this is where you would actually set that up. If you wanted to enable multiple LAN ports, or multiple WAN ports, excuse me, you can have up to 4 WANs plugged into the firewall model that I have. And then if we click on switch settings, we can edit our switch ports, and we can assign, for instance, a specific untagged VLAN or a specific VLAN to a port that will then become untagged on that particular port. So example, we got port 5 here. I can edit it, and I can say port 5's profile is the IoT VLAN, meaning that anything plugged into port number 5 is going to be natively on that network, that VLAN, without having, even if that device doesn't understand VLAN tagging. If we click on wireless networks, here we have all of our wireless network settings. We can see I have one network called Wi-Fi 6. We can enable or disable either the 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz band. We can give it a guest network. There's also very helpful pop-up help throughout the interface here, which is nice. Anytime you see this little eye with the circle around it. And then we can pick our security and password. If we go to our advanced settings, we can choose what type of security we're using. In this case, I'm using a WPA2 PSK / WPA3 SAE mixed mode security, meaning that it will do WPA3 if the device connecting has that capability. Otherwise, it does WPA2. And then there's all sorts of different options here. So we can do some rate limiting and then set that for either the download or the upload limit on a particular wireless network. There's also another place where we can do that, but you can choose whether to limit the per client to a specific bandwidth, or the aggregate of all clients on a specific wireless network are limited to a certain amount of bandwidth, which I think is a really nice feature. We can enable or disable our wireless LAN schedule. Here we got some rate control stuff and as well as MAC filtering. And for MAC filtering, you can basically have a deny list, as in don't allow these MAC addresses, or an allow list, which is only allow these MAC addresses to connect to this wireless network. And to do that, you would create a MAC address group and then add whatever MAC addresses are allowed or denied into that group, and then select the group right here. Network security is going to show us our access control list for the gateway, the switch, or the access points. You've got different access control lists for gateway, firewall, switch, or access point. You can do URL filtering. So this is kind of interesting. You can create rules for like deny specific URLs that people are going to be browsing to. Although it doesn't seem to have a, where you can import a list of bad URLs or something like that. This isn't like an OpenDNS or like Pi-hole type of service, but it's a way to block specific URLs from being used. And you can use wildcards. So if you wanted to do, their example is if you wanted to block out star.google.com, you could do that. Or if you wanted to block out star.facebook.com, you could do that right here. Then we have some attack defense stuff. This is probably like DDoS, intrusion detection type stuff. If we click on transmission, this is where you can add static routes. NAT, of course, allows you to set up your port forwarding and ALG. SIP ALG, by the way, is enabled by default. I disabled it in here. And if we click on session limit allows you to set up rules for limiting sessions that can be active on any of your networks at any given time. And then here we have bandwidth control. So you see this one that I set up for limiting Internet of Things. So you can say limit IoT, that's the name. We're enabling this rule for this specific network, which is my ID IoT network. For anything in the ID IoT network going out to the WAN, I want a maximum of 10 megabits. We could say it's in kilobits. We could say 10 megabits download and 1 megabit upload. And then you can choose, is that for all devices in that network or just for each individual device in that network? How are we limiting it? So I really like that a lot, actually, that you can basically say, hey, we're going to enable, like for a guest network, if you wanted a guest network to be, bandwidth limited to like 5 megabits by 2 megabits, is that per client or is that for the entire guest network? VPN allows you to create VPN policies. If you have multiple sites in Omada that you want to link together with VPN, it's as simple as basically choosing site-to-site VPN and then selecting the second site that you want to connect to. Or you can select client-to-site VPN if you want to establish a VPN tunnel with another, non-Omada device. If you wanted to create a, VPN tunnel to a Cisco firewall or something, this is where you would set that up. Then we have our profiles and groups. These are basically used in various places throughout the Omada interface. So for instance, I set up our business hours time group, which is weekdays between 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And we'll see where that's used in just a second. You can also click on groups, and this is where you can create different types of groups: IP groups, port groups, or MAC address groups, right? And so remember we talked about the MAC address filtering. This is where you would add all of the MAC addresses that you want to allow or deny onto any particular wireless network. Next we have Portal. So this is their captive portal stuff, which is actually pretty fully featured. You can see I turned it on. It does tell us though that having the controller online for the captive portal is required, meaning that your clients have to be able to see the Omada interface or the Omada controller, whether that's in the cloud, in self-installed, or one of these hardware controllers. Your clients do have to be able to see that device for the hotspot or portal functionality to work. You can choose which SSID you're tying the portal to, what type of authentication, including simple password, radius, hotspot authentication, Facebook authentication, what's the timeout values. Then of course you can customize the landing page and also do access control stuff down here. So again, fully featured. I did not test any of this hotspot functionality out, right? So I didn't test out a lot of this stuff. Mostly I'm just showing you guys what exists in the interface. And if you have real world experience with how the TP-Link Omada stuff actually functions, put that down in the comments, because that's going to be super helpful for people that are evaluating this solution. Then we have some 802.1x, radius authentication stuff. You can enable MAC-based authentication, radius profiles, And then finally, we get into our various services. So dynamic DNS, SNMP, universal plug and play, SSH. Are we enabling SSH on this stuff? This is interesting. Reboot schedule. So check this out. Create new reboot schedule. So we're going to call this reboot APs. We're going to enable it, and we're going to say every month on the first of the month at 12 p.m. Oh, got to put a dash in there. 12 a.m. Excuse me. We're going to reboot these two devices. So it's kind of just like a maintenance thing, right? If you just want your access points to power cycle once a month, well, you can just put them in this, set up a reboot schedule for those devices. Pretty cool. There's also PoE schedules. Remember I told you I set up my business hours just a couple minutes ago. Let's say I had a whole bunch of voice over IP phones plugged into this device. And maybe I wanted those voice over IP phones to shut off at night, right? Maybe I don't need them on all night. So if normal business hours are 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., well, outside of those hours, let's just turn off PoE on the ports that control my voice over IP phones. That way we're not wasting that extra electricity by having those phones on all night. And then maybe, half hour before people arrive in the morning, we're going to fire those phones back up or re-enable PoE on those ports. So you can basically do that right here. So we can say disable VoIP, we can select our business hours that we set up previously, and then I can choose, ports, say 7 and 8, right? So this means that with this schedule created, at 8 a.m., the PoE is enabled, and at 6 p.m., the PoE is disabled. So we're basically turning off all those phones outside of business hours, which is really cool. I have not yet seen controller software that can do that, so I think that's a really neat feature. And then finally, we can export all our data. Device list, client list, rogue access point list, etc., etc. We can export anything, a lot of the stuff in Omada out to a CSV in case that is helpful to you in some way. All right, let's go down now to our controller settings. So these are settings for the OC200 hardware device, or if you've got it in the cloud, or if you have a self-installed version of the Omada controller, this is all of your settings. Time zone, NTP servers, are we enabling a mail server? How long are we keeping our history? Let's now click on cloud access. So for cloud access, we can see that I have my cloud access connected and I have bound it to my TP-Link ID. But if you did not want your devices to be cloud controllable, right? So that, there's certainly some security risk involved in that. If you're connecting out to the cloud and the cloud gets compromised, it is possible for your devices internally to get compromised through that cloud connection, right? So if you don't want that possibility, you can simply disable cloud access for your controller and unlink your TP-Link ID, and you're good to go. All you have is local authentication credentials. Maintenance just shows us some information about the controller, such as the controller version, like user interface if we want 24-hour time, and then we can back up and restore. If we want to reboot or factory reset or run upgrades or do a manual firmware update, that's all done in here. If we click on migration, this is actually really nice. There's two types of migration. There's site migration. So if we had 10 sites in our Omada controller and we wanted to migrate just 2 of them over to a different controller, we can do that with the site migration, but they also have controller migration. So if we wanted to migrate the entire controller, say if we were upgrading from an OC200 to an OC300, or if we were going from a cloud controller to a hardware controller, right? We can migrate the entire controller through the wizards that they have in here. And finally, we have auto backup. And when you plug a USB stick into the hardware controller, you can turn on auto backup and then choose how often you're backing up to that external USB device. Okay, I mean, that's a lot, right? There's a lot to go through with this software because it's a huge interface. I mean, you're controlling an entire network, right? So it's a lot to talk about. Hopefully I didn't brush through it too quickly for you guys, but from what I can see, TP-Link Omada is fully featured and mature. Like, I'm pretty impressed with it. The hardware, now let's start talking about the hardware. Okay, so I ran the Wi-Fi 6 access point against all of my Crosstalk benchmark testing. Let's see how it did. In my iPerf testing, here we can see the EAP620. It came in 5th place behind the 4x4 U6LR and then all of these other access points. Basically, it came in 5th place just behind the Nano HD in the iPerf testing. In my open speed testing, it came in 6th place. So just above the Ubiquiti UAP AC Pro. And then in the sustained throughput test, it came in 4th place. Now, for the entire sort of Crosstalk benchmark, where did this thing actually place? Well, we placed 5th. So the EAP 620 is 5th place. Here you can see the U6LR, which is still our reigning champion, followed by this ingenious EWS 850AP, the U6 Lite, the Nano HD, and then finally we have the TP-Link EAP 620, which is 2x2 multi-user MIMO Wi-Fi 6. Or in other words, you can kind of think of this access point as on par with the UAP AC Pro and the Nano HD, right? It's sort of sandwiched in between those two access points. For the price, let's take a look at the bang for your buck metric. The EAP 620 came in 4th, right? So bang for your buck, U6 Lite, U6LR, then Nano HD, still ahead of the TP-Link device based on performance for the price. But then 4th place is this TP-Link EA620, just edging out the UAP AC Pro and definitely beating both of the ingenious access points that I've tested so far. We've seen the performance statistics, we've seen the TP-Link Omada interface, so let's get to the million-dollar question. Is TP-Link Omada a viable alternative to Ubiquiti? And of course, like anything, the answer is complicated, and it depends on what metric you're comparing the two against, right? So let's look at a few different metrics, all right? We're gonna look at price, feature set, performance, security, aesthetics, as well as the support available for both of these products. Starting off with price. TP-Link blows Ubiquiti out of the water on price, okay? So here I have a spreadsheet of some comparable items. For the router firewall, we're using the TP-Link ER605, versus the most cost-effective firewall on the Ubiquiti side, which is the USG. For the switch, we have the 8-port TP-Link switch with 2 SFP ports. The closest comparable switch on the Ubiquiti side is the US8 150 watt. The EAP 620 is a 2x2 Wi-Fi 6 access point, just like the U6 Lite. Then we have the Wi-Fi 5 EAP 225-wall, which is a 802.11 AC in-wall access point. The closest one to that would be the UAP in-wall HD on the Ubiquiti side. And for the hardware controller, we have the OC200 or the CloudKey Gen 2. Now, look at the difference in price here, right? $519 for the TP-Link stuff, $795 for Ubiquiti stuff, a savings of a very comparable network from TP-Link of $275. Or in other words, TP-Link comes out to be about 2/3 the price of a comparable Ubiquiti setup. But of course, price isn't everything. So let's talk next about feature set. In my opinion, this is a wash. The feature set between TP-Link Omada versus UniFi are about the same. So when you think about it, most people are just going to have very vanilla needs. I'm talking 90+% of people. Both of these platforms are going to have absolutely everything that you need. That being said, there are some things that TP-Link has that Ubiquiti doesn't, and there are some things that Ubiquiti UniFi has that TP-Link doesn't. So for those sort of outliers, maybe there's a specific feature that you can only get in TP-Link, and that would prevent you from using UniFi at all, or vice versa, right? So in terms of feature set, it really comes down to what you need when you're installing, but by and large, these two products are very comparable in what they can actually do. I will say, however, if you're comparing these on security, I think Ubiquiti has the upper hand, which is funny to say considering the breach that they recently had. But the reason that I say Ubiquiti has the upper hand in terms of security is that you have to look at the fact that both Ubiquiti and TP-Link offer local administration options as well as cloud-hosted options. TP-Link makes the local administrative options a little bit easier, whereas Ubiquiti likes to kind of hide the local administrative credentials. They try to force everyone to the cloud. But In the cloud, Ubiquiti does have the option for two-factor authentication with time-based one-time passwords, or TOTP codes. TP-Link does not have the option for two-factor authentication. And I would say if TP-Link is looking to make themselves a more viable competitor to Ubiquiti, cloud-based 2FA is 100% mandatory, and local-based 2FA, so if you want to use local authentication credentials, but also enable 2FA, would be a really, really nice feature to implement. So for security, Ubiquiti is going to edge out TP-Link. Next, on to performance. So you guys saw the performance that I got in the benchmark testing that I did, but the problem with my benchmark testing is that your mileage may vary, right? There's every wireless implementation, every wireless install is going to be completely different, right? So the placement of the access points, the quantity of the access points, how the access points are configured in terms of output power, or the channel that they're set to be on, the channel width that they're set to, as well as environmental factors such as the construction materials for the building or house that they're placed into. These are all factors for performance, right? In my testing, TP-Link did not perform as well as a comparable Ubiquiti access point. But I've also heard online that TP-Link performs for some people a lot better than Ubiquiti performs. I've also heard online that TP-Link is garbage and doesn't perform anywhere near as well as Ubiquiti performs, right? So everyone has their own opinion. I really can't gauge these on performance. So for the purposes of this video, it's going to be a toss-up, right? I mean, even if you took my performance stats as gospel and we're like, nope, the TP-Link access point is X amount percentage lower performing than any comparable Ubiquiti equipment. Well, even assuming that that would be the case, it's debatable whether that difference in performance that I saw in my testing would even be noticeable to end users, right? So you'd have to like put this in place and have the Ubiquiti network running for a while in a production environment and then swap it out for the same TP-Link stuff running in a production environment for a long time. And if you were able to do that, you'd get a good feel for that particular installation, whether Ubiquiti was a better fit or TP-Link was a better fit. So as far as performance goes, again, I'm going to call it a wash because I haven't tested these in production. We have tested a bunch of Ubiquiti gear in production, and I can say that Ubiquiti is a very well-performing product. Whether TP-Link would be able to stand up to the same performance that we've seen from Ubiquiti, well, that I just haven't tested, nor am I able to test that because we don't use TP-Link in production environments. But if you have TP-Link running in a production environment, either for a business or for yourself at home, and you have feedback about having TP-Link running versus having Ubiquiti running, put that down in the comments below so that people can read that. I would love to hear anyone's feedback on that particular subject. All right, aesthetics. All right, let's take a look at this. This is TP-Link's 2x2 Wi-Fi 6 access point. All right. This is Ubiquiti's 2x2 Wi-Fi 6 access point, right? Look at the difference in size between these two. Look at this. Look at it. Just the thinness of this one, right? So this is another big difference in that the Ubiquiti products have the edge aesthetically because I think these are a lot sexier, right? They're just a sexier design. They are not nearly as obtrusive as this one. Like if you had both of these on the wall at your business, your restaurant, or your whatever, your home, this one is a lot more inconspicuous than the TP-Link. And this one just has one like light on the front, whereas this has this fancy sort of blue ring that you can control the the brightness of, and on some models you can even control the color of the blue ring. So like just design wise, aesthetically, Ubiquiti has TP-Link beat hands down. So the question is then, are the aesthetics worth the like 30% additional price tag? And that would be up to you. Finally, let's talk about support options. And again, to me, this is a wash, right? Because I have not used TP-Link's technical support. But by the way, I've also barely ever used Ubiquiti's technical support. But anyone who's in the Ubiquiti world will tell you that their support is pretty lacking. Like, it's difficult to get good Ubiquiti support through Ubiquiti. And I imagine it's probably pretty similar with TP-Link. Again, that's my assumption because I haven't used them, nor have I, had a lot of experience with customers that have tried to use TP-Link support. So if you go to their support page for business products, you've got a knowledge base, you've got live chat support, email support, as well as phone support right on their page, right? So they make it pretty easy to get to their support, but the experience of actually using their support, I have not tried, so I can't tell you how good it is. They also have a TP-Link community page, but again, Ubiquiti has a community page as well. I'm not sure how active the TP-Link community page is. I know that Ubiquiti's community page is actually fairly active with a lot of people, in there making comments and asking questions. Now, here's the thing though. With these products, with these sort of prosumer type products, you're not paying the annual license fee for good support, right? These are like one-time purchase products and it comes with support, but yeah, not really, right? You're kind of on your own for these types of products. If you're a business that absolutely needs really good, solid 24/7, 365 support on a product, then you're going to be going with Cisco or Aruba or Ruckus or Meraki, one of these other vendors that provides that type of really good support. And I can hear the comments already like, oh, he said Meraki support's awesome, but I know Meraki support sucks. I'm just throwing out names as an example, right? Any of those companies that have annual licensing fees for their product, typically those licensing fees are justified and come with a higher level of support services than you're going to get from these types of prosumer products that don't have annual license fees, right? And that's just the way of the world, right? That's just the way that business works. If you're a business that relies upon these products and you need to have, 100% uptime or as close to that as possible, then it's worth it to you to pay the annual license fees for that support, if for nothing else. Now, of course, where I disagree with that is when you stop paying the support license if the device stops working. I don't like that model at all. I mean, if you buy the device, it should work for as long as that device is alive. And if you're paying annual support fees, it should be for things like, software and firmware updates and or support services. I don't like when if you don't pay your annual support, the device itself stops working. That's an absolutely ridiculous business model. So as far as support goes in general, again, I'm going to call TP-Link and Ubiquiti a wash. So really what it comes down to is I think Ubiquiti has TP-Link beat on aesthetics and TP-Link has Ubiquiti beat on price. But other than that, most of the other categories that I've mentioned are pretty similar between these two products. Feature set, performance, security. I will say Ubiquiti does have the edge on security because they offer 2FA on their cloud anytime you're connected to their cloud. So yeah, your mileage may vary. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this down below. But if you guys have any of these TP-Link Omada devices in production, I'd especially like to hear from you. So put your feedback down in the comments so that other people can see that. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, make sure you click subscribe. My name's Chris with Crosstalk Solutions, and thank you so much for watching.